Today we are working on Psalm 48. Psalm 48 is used very frequently to arouse positive feelings, also to bring certainty of a perfect outcome in any situation. And that's exactly what we're going to be using it for today. We're going to use Psalm 48 to be certain of a perfect outcome in any situation. The way we work Psalm magic is very simple, highly effective, very powerful. We take the psalm in question and we recite it out loud all the way through once without stopping. This is known as an incantation. And then we take that same psalm and we go back through it and we consider each verse in turn. And we search and dig. We try to find occult, hidden meanings within the words of the psalm. As we are searching and finding those occult meanings and contemplating them, we also try to apply what we find there to whatever situation we have brought to the psalm. And by doing all of this, we are in a very real sense taking those seeds of magic that we find in the psalm and planting them deeply in the fertile grounds of our minds, where they, in a very real way, take root, grow, blossom forth, and bear fruit after their kind. And that's what we're going to do together right now with Psalm 48. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountains of his holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed by together, they saw it, and so they marveled, they were troubled and hasted away. Fear took hold upon them there, and pain as of a woman in travail. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. As we have heard, so have we seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God. God will establish it forever. Selah. We have thought of thy loving kindness, O God, in the midst of thy temple. According to thy name, O God, so is thy praise unto the ends of the earth. Thy right hand is full of righteousness. Let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of thy judgments. Walk about Zion and go round about her. Tell the towers thereof. Mark ye well her bulwarks. Consider her palaces, that ye may tell it to the generation following. For this is God, our God forever and ever. He will be our guide, even unto death. All right, so great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. So first we want to orient ourselves to the Lord. So the Lord, which is the tetragrammaton, it represents a singular force of good, a singular force that is the one force, the one power, the one source, the one substance in all the universe. And since there is only one, nothing can oppose it, nothing can thwart it. And that's exactly what this force is for us. And when we are working with this force, there really is nothing that can go against us, because one with God is a majority. So it says, great is the Lord. So this force is great, and it is great. It's not like great because there's some other forces that are not as great as this one. There's only one, so of course it's great. So great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. Now, where's the city of our God? The city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness, it's called Zion in the Psalms, and that is a symbol for that part of our mind that is exalted, the highest part of our consciousness, where we and this force are one. When we come down off of that mountain into the day-to-day activities of our lives and our just normal waking, thinking consciousness, we recognize that we are in a sort of a sleep here. We are in a sort of sleep and a dream because we're not always thinking in an exalted manner. So it's by exalting our consciousness, rising up in consciousness, that we find that city, that temple, that mountain. So that's what we're doing when we're working Psalm Magic, is we are raising and elevating our consciousness in order to find this connection with this force so that we can effect change in our lives. Beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion. So Mount Zion is the joy of the whole earth. That means that when we connect with that exalted, raised awareness within our minds, all aspects of our life rejoice. So that's why when we work a psalm, and we do a psalm in this manner, that we're working the psalm number 48, is that not only are we going to have a good time while we're exalting our consciousness, but all aspects of our lives are going to rejoice and are going to respond to that. So we're expecting results in our lives. On the sides of the north, in the city of the great king. The great king, the city of the north, the great king, that's representing the situation that we are bringing to the psalm. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion. On the sides of the north, the city of the great king. All of that is going to rejoice by the fact that we are exalted on this mountain. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. So God's known inside the palaces of this city as a refuge. A refuge is where you're going to be hidden from trouble. But the only way to hide from trouble from God's point of view is just to be raised above the trouble. That's why it's a refuge, because you are being raised and lifted above any trouble so that you're at a vantage point where you have all peace, all power, and all good can then manifest. For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed together. I'm going to take these next two together. For lo, the kings were assembled, they passed together. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away. So in this sense, the kings in general are big circumstances in our lives, things which seem more powerful than we are, things that seem like we have no choice about. And it's saying what those situations are. They were assembled, but they passed by together because they saw this city. They saw what this power is. They marveled. It made them very troubled, so they rushed away. And when we put something in the past tense like that, what it does is it speeds up the results. So that's what's happening to anything that's standing in the way of our positive result. Any problems that we're having with this situation that we've brought to the psalm are hastening away. They're running away. Those problems are running away because they're afraid of the fact that they're going to be dissolved by this power. So all good is what exists on top of that exalted state of consciousness, or that Mount Zion, and anything that's trouble sees that and runs away. Fear took a hold upon them there, and pain as of a woman in travail. So the problems are so troubled that they are in pain. Now, we don't wish pain on sentient beings. This is just a symbol for the troubles that are standing against us, that as much pain as sometimes they cause us, that's the pain that they are experiencing. In other words, those troubled situations will be staying far away from us because it's painful for those troubles to be in our presence because of our exalted state. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. Now, Tarshish, nobody really knows what it was, that land. Nobody's ever been able to find a real historical proof that such a place existed. It's sort of like Atlantis. But Tarshish represents a city of commerce where a lot of trading was going on. But what it represents in the Psalms is hard situations, tough situations, immovable situations, hard, cold reality that there's just nothing you can do about it. So it's saying that the ships of that are broken with an east wind. Now, what comes from the east? Think of east of Eden in the Genesis story. East of Eden is where God took Cain to protect Cain from being in trouble for what was considered to be a negative action. So that eastern wind is actually helping to blow away all of our problems blow away all of our problems. So when God takes something from the east, it's symbolic that God's in charge of it. God's 100% in charge of whatever's coming from the east. That's just a symbol. And so an eastern wind in that sense is that God will not abide any of these problems, any of these hardened conditions. As we have heard, so have we seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God. God will establish it forever. So as we have heard, so have we seen. Isn't that special? Isn't that wonderful? As we have heard, so we have seen. So you hear it first and then you see it. So that is giving you a context for what your words are. If you're hearing it, that means you're saying it, you're speaking it either in your mind or with your mouth. And what you hear in your mind is something that you will eventually see. And then it's saying, in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, God will establish it forever. That means that anything that you desire, if you hear it, then you'll see it, and God will establish it. God will establish it. But anything that is hardened, anything that is against the will of God, will be blown away, will be destroyed. Both together in the same part of the psalm. We have thought of thy loving kindness, O God, in the midst of thy temple. So thinking of the loving kindness of God, thinking of sphere number 4, the sphere of mercy. When you're in the temple of God, that doesn't mean that you're going to some building. The temple is on the Mount Zion, so it's in your mind. And in your mind, you want to think of God's loving kindness. Why? Because thought is reality. Thought creates reality. All thought creates form. So you want to think in terms of God's loving kindness while you're in that temple, because whatever you think of in that temple is what you hear and then what you will see, because that's how it works. You hear it, then you see it, and then God establishes it. Now, if you are at odds with God's will, then God doesn't establish it, but you establish it, and that's when we have problems. So we don't want to establish our own thoughts separate from God. We want to have God establish the thoughts of God in our lives. So we want to think thoughts of God in God's temple, not thoughts of our ego. And the thoughts of God are thoughts of loving kindness. According to thy name, O God, so is thy praise unto the ends of the earth. Thy right hand is full of righteousness. So according to thy name, the name of God is the nature of God. So all those qualities of God, there's a lot of qualities of God. We talk about 8 qualities of God that are pretty typical. The principle of life, divine life, the principle of divine soul, the principle of divine spirit, the principle of infinite intelligence, the principle of divine truth, the principle of perfect love, the principle of divine law, and the principle of divine presence. Those are all things that you can think of because those are the names of God. According to thy name, O God, so is thy praise unto the ends of the earth. Thy right hand is full of righteousness. God is praising. God is praising, and God praises. Now, God's right hand is the sphere of Mars. So when God's gotten hold of that sphere of severity, what does God do? God praises. God gives everything good. God gives everything good. And so that's how we are victorious over problems. That's how we are victorious over anything that seems to stand in our way, because God's right hand, or that severe warrior part of God, is full of righteousness. Well, what's righteousness? Righteousness is right thinking. Right thinking, so good thoughts. So all of the thoughts of God are what overcome all problems in our lives. And that's how God praises us. So God praises us already. And a lot of people don't think of it that way. A lot of people think, oh no, we have to praise God because God's up in the sky and that's how we get God's ear. We've already got God's ear. God never stopped listening to us. But see, God is already praising us. Because why? God thinks that we're amazing. Why? Because God created us amazing. So if we're not experiencing God's praise, if we're not experiencing our lives as God created us, that's because we're thinking thoughts that are separate from God. And in this psalm, we're saying, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to allow ourselves to think the thoughts of God by exalting our consciousness, by raising our consciousness and thinking the thoughts of God, thinking thoughts of loving kindness, it says. Let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of thy judgments. The daughters of Judah represent the thoughts which come out of thoughts. The thoughts of God give birth to thoughts, give birth to thoughts, give birth to thoughts. Those are called generations in the Psalms. And so whatever you're experiencing is a result of thought. A lot of times we think of the mind as being separate from our experience, but actually our experience is a thought. So when we're thinking thoughts that are not of God, we are experiencing generations of experiences that are not of God. But when we're thinking the thoughts of God, we're experiencing generations of experiences which are of God. And that's just Metaphysics 101A. That's just how life works. So when we're experiencing experiences that we don't like, we have to look at our thought process and learn how to come back to a psalm like this and learn how to exalt our mind, to raise our consciousness, to start thinking the thoughts of God, and then allowing those thoughts of God to have triumph over the experience. And that's what we talked about earlier with the right hand of God. Walk about Zion and go round about her. Tell the towers thereof. So we talked about letting Mount Zion rejoice. The mountain itself is going to rejoice. You can't be exalted and uplifted and enlightened without joy. They are one and the same. If you're not having joy, then you know that you don't have that exalted experience in your mind. So as that experience of upliftment happens, we are asking that the daughters of Judah, those generations of thought, walk about Zion, go round about her and tell the towers thereof. Mark well her bulwarks, consider her palaces, that ye may tell it to the generations following. So that's talking about trains of thought. Remember, thought always expands. Nothing stands still. Nothing contracts in divine mind. This universe of infinite intelligence is constantly expanding, constantly growing and moving forward. And so the thoughts of God, those daughters of Judah that are having generation after generation after generation, we are commanding those thoughts to walk about the temple, to walk about the mountain, to walk about all aspects of our consciousness and tell all the rest of our mind what's what. No longer are we going to have private intellects, thoughts that we think separate and privately. We want all of our mind to be instructed by these daughters of Judah, these thoughts of God, these generations of God, again and again and again, so that we have this never-ending line of thinking that goes on forever and ever and ever. And that's this miraculous train of thought that comes straight from God all through every aspect of our lives for all eternity. And you can think of it like a beam of light right out of a sun that never ends. That beam of light never ends. It's constantly growing and moving forward. And that's who you are. For this God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even unto death. Okay, so forever and ever exists in the fairy tales and exists in the Psalms. That's pretty much where we find forever and ever. So this happily ever after, this forever and everness, talks about what? The present moment. It talks about here and now. That's where forever exists. It's not something that's going to be continuing in time. It's something that continues outside of time. And outside of time exists right now. That's where eternity is. And God is forever in the present moment. God is creating you in the present moment. God is creating everything in the present moment. And when we're existing outside of the present moment, we're existing in a time that doesn't really exist. We're existing in an artificial time. And that's where God doesn't exist. So if we're living in the past or we're living in the future, we're not living in the present moment, we're not living in this forever and ever where God lives. And God, it says, will be our guide unto death. Unto death, we don't have to think about it so much as unto when this body will die. But God will be our guide no matter what, even until this situation dies. The situation that we're worried about. And even once the situation passes by, we're going to have another situation, and God will be our guide there. And then God will be our guide on to the next one and to the next one. Remember, forever and ever exists in the present moment. So if you're allowing yourself to be guided and led each and every moment, then you are living in eternity, and you're living in heaven. You're living in that state of awareness where God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even unto death. Not only unto death, like I said, of the physical body, but from situation to situation to situation, to allow us to exist outside of time, to exist outside of mortality, to exist on the other side of the veil, where we have eternity. And that's exactly what the psalm is there for. The psalm is there to bring us eternity in the place of mortality, to bring us success in the place of failure, to bring us certainty in the place of doubt, to bring healing in the place of disease, to bring prosperity in the place of poverty, etc. And that's what this is all about. So you just keep coming back to that psalm every single day until you get a sense of peace and a sense of certainty that all is working out. And when you get that sense of peace and certainty, that is a sign to you that the spell has taken and that manifestation is imminent, and that you don't have to work on this anymore, whatever this was. You can move on to the next thing. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.